Our newscast tonight, U.S. Undersecretary of State Wendy Sherman assures South Korea that they share the common goal of denuclearizing North Korea. Meanwhile, new satellite images show Pyongyang may be reigniting its nuclear ambitions. Strong chip sales helped Samsung Electronics pick up the pieces after being shattered by a shockingly poor performance in the third quarter last year. And Islamic State captors continue to change terms on a prisoner swap. Japan and Jordan want more substantial assurances before concluding negotiations. These stories and more coming up next. It's 6 p.m. on a Thursday evening here in Korea. Live from Seoul, this is Daniel Chen.
And I'm Lee Ji-yoon. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Making the top of our news lineup today is, of course, North Korea. There are signs that North Korea might be restarting its nuclear reactor.
Yes, after it's been shut down for 5 months, new satellite imagery is showing activity over at the North's main nuclear reactor. Our Connie Kim starts us off.
After nearly half a year of supposed inactivity, North Korea may have restarted operating its main nuclear reactor. Satellite imagery posted on the 38 North website shows hot water draining from a pipe at the 5-megawatt Yongbyon reactor and snow melting on the roof of the reactor and turbine buildings, possible signals that efforts to restart it are taking place inside. The U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University, which runs 38 North, says the developments were observed over a 2-week period from December 24th to January 11th. It stresses, however, that it's too early to determine what exactly is happening at the reactor. This latest development comes as the two Koreas have been making overtures toward holding inter-Korean talks. On the other hand, U.S.-North Korea relations are frosty over North Korea's alleged cyber attack on Sony Pictures. Experts say that while suspicious, the latest activity at the reactor could be fairly innocuous.
It's hard to tell. The activities could be linked to simple maintenance procedures preparing for the summertime. However, if the Yongbyon reactor is being restarted, I think it'd be a means to pressure the U.S. more than South Korea.
The Yongbyon nuclear reactor is closely watched as it's where Pyongyang produces its weapons-grade plutonium. Adding to concerns, North Korea is thought to have made progress on its ballistic missile technology. Earlier this month, in its defense white paper, Seoul said the North had taken big steps toward making nuclear warheads small enough to fit on ballistic missiles. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Two allies sharing a similar goal. A senior U.S. official reiterated that the United States supports South Korea's efforts to improve inter-Korean ties, and that the two countries are on the same page when it comes to North Korea. Here's our Hwang Sung-hee with more.
U.S. Undersecretary of State Wendy Sherman reiterated that the United States and South Korea share the same policy when it comes to North Korea. This as Washington has been ramping up pressure on Pyongyang amid Seoul's efforts to improve inter-Korean relations, raising concerns that the two allies were losing coordination.
We have the same policy as the Republic of Korea does, and that is to ultimately have a denuclearized peninsula. Denuclearization is the first priority where North Korea is concerned.
Following a vice minister's meeting in Seoul on Thursday, Sherman said all members of the six-party nuclear talks, aside from North Korea, are working together to see what more they can do to engage Pyongyang. The multilateral dialogue involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia, has been stalled for more than 6 years. Earlier this month, the U.S. rejected North Korea's offer to temporarily suspend nuclear tests in return for a halt in joint military drills between Seoul and Washington. It has been urging Pyongyang to take steps towards denuclearization before returning to talks, but Sherman declined to specify what those steps were.
North Korea needs to show concretely that is taking steps towards denuclearization. There are many ways to do that, and I support our special envoy in his efforts, and I'm not going to list specifics either.
Sherman reiterated that Washington supports President Park Geun-hye's initiatives for inter-Korean dialogue, saying that the U.S. looks forward to the day the peninsula is unified. South Korea was the second leg of her three-nation tour, which also included China and Japan. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
And the two countries are also planning to talk cybersecurity. South Korean and U.S. defense officials are expected to hold a second round of their annual cybersecurity talks in Washington in the coming months. There, they will focus on how to better manage cyber attacks originating from North Korea and ways to strengthen information sharing networks. The working group will also analyze the two countries' weak points in responding to any forms of cyber attack. The two allies launched a cyber cooperation working group back in 2013 and held their first meeting in Seoul last February. Turning now to a revelation by former President Lee Myung-bak. The former South Korean president says that while he was in office, North Korea offered to hold an inter-Korean summit and apologize over the deadly torpedo attack on a South Korean warship if the South gave it 500,000 tons of rice. Here's Hwang Jae with more.
Former South Korean President Lee Myung-bak has shed light on previously hidden history between the end of 2009 to early 2011. He says Pyongyang asked for 500,000 tons of rice in July 2010 in return for inter-Korean talks and its apology for the Cheonan warship sinking. This came in an extract reported by Seoul-based Yonhap news agency on Thursday ahead of the official release of Lee's 800-page memoir on his presidency. The former president said he refused the offer because it would have been under Pyongyang's terms and he was not comfortable with it. He added the North's planned statement on the Cheonan warship sinking would have been a general apology, not an acceptance of its responsibility. He also said he strongly pressured then-Chinese President Hu Jintao during a G20 meeting in June 2010 to enforce international sanctions against Pyongyang after the deadly sinking. On his highly controversial river restoration project, he pointed to other major government projects that faced criticism at the time but were evaluated to be successful by future generations. The Four Rivers Project, a signature project of the former leader, has long been under fire over alleged shady construction deals and the irreversible damage it has done to local ecosystems. Lee's book called President's Time is set to hit shelves next Monday. Hwang Jae, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye headed over to a daycare center in the western city of Incheon today to gather suggestions on ways to prevent child abuse. The president said the government will listen not only to experts but to parents and caretakers on ways to improve child care policies. The president also talked about requiring all daycare centers to set up surveillance cameras. She added the move could help build trust between parents and daycare centers, though it's not a fundamental solution to the problem. The center the president visited operates 24 hours a day, and parents actively participate in how it's run, as well as regularly consulting with the staff. Daycare centers have made headlines in recent weeks here in Korea because of a string of unfortunate child abuse cases. Moving over to outside of Korea, the Islamic State has set a new deadline for its Jordanian hostage. The group is demanding Jordan take the convicted Iraqi suicide bomber to the Turkish border by sunset Thursday, or else it'll execute the Jordanian pilot. The fate of the Japanese hostage, however, remains unclear. Our Kim Ji-hyun has the latest.
Islamic State militants have set a new deadline for swapping Iraqi prisoner Sajida al-Rishawi for a captured Jordanian pilot. A message allegedly from IS says al-Rishawi should be delivered to the Turkish border by sunset on Thursday. It says the Jordanian hostage will be executed immediately if Jordan does not hand her over by the new deadline. Jordanian state TV quoted government spokesman Mohammed al-Momani as saying Amman is willing to make the exchange.
The Jordanian government spokesperson said it is ready to free Sajida al-Rishawi if First Lieutenant al-Qasabi is safely released from IS captivity.
Bomani said the release of the pilot, who comes from a prominent family in Jordan, is important to the monarchy. But the exchange would go against Ahmad's policy of not negotiating with extremists and could potentially set a new precedent. Amid the crossroads, the father of the pilot demanded the government secure his son's swift release.
Jordanians should push their government to protect the life of their son, or otherwise your king is the one who killed him in his stubbornness. You have to know that my son will not be the last soldier or Jordanian citizen who will be sacrificed.
The Jordanian pilot was captured in northern Syria in December when his F-16 fell from the sky. Sajida al-Rishawi has been behind bars for over a decade for attempting a suicide bomb attack in Jordan. There was no mention of the Japanese hostage Kenji Koto in the new offer, also being held by Islamic State. Tokyo says it's working closely with Jordan for Koto's release. Kim Jun, Arirang News.
And it's been confirmed there were no Korean casualties in the recent attack on a luxury hotel in Libya. At least 10 people, including 5 foreigners, were killed in that attack. The Korean embassy in Tripoli told Yonhap News on Thursday that the 5 foreign casualties included 1 U.S. citizen, 1 French national, and 3 people from Kyrgyzstan. Militants loyal to the Islamic State have claimed responsibility for the attack, releasing photos of 2 suicide bombers whom it said carried out the attack. 2 gunmen burst into the 5-star hotel on Tuesday and set off a car bomb in the parking lot.
The U.S. Fed has reiterated that it will remain patient in determining when to raise interest rates, citing the country's unusually low inflation. However, it did say the U.S. economy is expanding at a solid pace. Our Kim In-jae reports.
The Federal Reserve signaled its plans to raise its key interest rates sometime later this year. At the end of a 2-day policy meeting in Washington on Wednesday, the U.S. Central Bank said it will be patient when determining the appropriate time to boost interest rates. What's worth noting here is the change in wording from when it said it would keep the rate unchanged for a considerable time. The Fed said that the U.S. economy was growing at a solid pace, citing improved labor market conditions with strong job gains and a lower unemployment rate. The central bank also said the declines in energy costs had boosted the purchasing power of households, and inflation has declined below the committee's longer-run objective. As for when it would lift the rates from the current 0 to 0.25% range, the Fed said that it would take into account a wide range of information, including measures of labor market conditions, inflation expectations, and ratings on financial and international developments. The central bank has kept interest rates low to stimulate the U.S. economy in the wake of the financial crisis. Analysts estimate a rate hike as early as June. Kim In-jae, Arirang News.
And back here in Korea, Samsung Electronics' final figures for the 4th quarter did improve from the previous quarter, but its annual earnings total marked the lowest level in 3 years. The shares closed 1% lower at Thursday's market close, and our Song Ji-sun has more.
Samsung Electronics has rebounded from its earnings shock in the 3rd quarter of last year, but it's still underperforming compared to the previous year. Samsung's operating profit for the 4th quarter stood at $4.9 billion, up 30% from the previous quarter. That still marks a 36% on-year decrease, but the drop was slower than in the 3rd quarter as Samsung's chip business reported strong sales at a 4-year high. Memory chips have become Samsung's biggest profit driver in the 3rd quarter, overtaking handsets, and now account for more than half of the company's profit at $2.5 billion. Samsung's final Q4 figures come just days after its rival Apple announced a record net income of $18 billion for the same period, nearly 4 times higher than that of Samsung's. Profit for the mobile division plummeted to just $1.8 billion from 2013's $5 billion, and data from Strategy Analytics showed that Samsung and Apple each sold 74.5 million units of smartphones in the last quarter. That's a 46% jump for Apple, but a 15% drop for Samsung in the sector, with Apple's large-screen iPhone 6 models in direct competition with the Korean tech giant.
Samsung vowed to reinforce its high-end lineup with premium models, at the same time expanding its share in the low-end market by launching its mid-priced A3 and A5 models in the global market. Analysts forecast a modest recovery for the company this year on the back of demand for its memory chips and processors from its rival smartphone makers. Samsung also followed other Korean firms in committing to paying higher dividends to its shareholders by raising the amount by nearly 40% from a year earlier to $18 per share. 송지선, Arirang News.
Young job seekers here in Korea are finding it hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. No signs yet that Korea's unemployment blues are getting any better. In fact, it seems to be getting worse. Youth unemployment rate in Seoul breached the 10% mark for the first time ever last year. According to a new report by the Seoul Metropolitan Government, the number of unemployed people between the ages of 15 and 29 stood at 100,000 in 2014, up well over 20% from the previous year. That's the highest it has been since the city began collecting related data in the year 2000. The overall number of unemployed in Seoul also spiked 15% last year from a year earlier to a record high of slightly over 240,000. Moving over to other stories, when investors think of emerging markets worth putting money into, many still think of Brazil, Russia, India, and China, also known as the BRIC group. But some analysts suggest now is the time to look beyond those nations. Our Eujin Ju has more.
Apart from the BRIC countries, which do you think is the most promising emerging market this year? The Korea International Trade Association asked some 540 Korean companies this question, and the answer is Vietnam. In fact, most of the countries ranked high on the list were Southeast Asian countries, namely Indonesia, Thailand, and Malaysia. The top 15 nations also include Saudi Arabia, Mexico, and Poland. What's noticeable about these countries is their demographics. The Trade Association says young people between the ages of 15 and 24 make up a big portion of the population of those top 15 countries. This means they have a lot of room to grow, as these are the people who will lead future production and consumption. This is perhaps why more than half of the Korean firms surveyed said they're considering making inroads into those markets. As for the top choice, Vietnam, its economic growth last year hovered above the global average at 5.6% and is forecast to continue that momentum this year. The most volatile variable for Hanoi is crude oil prices. As an oil exporting country, falling crude prices will hurt its GDP, but Vietnamese officials say it will also help bring down the country's high inflation rate. But no matter what the case, experts warn that those wishing to enter these emerging markets, including Vietnam, will have to vigorously monitor the market conditions and utilize free trade agreements, as these countries often come with high risks. Eujin Ju, Arirang News.
It seems Koreans' love for coffee knows no bounds. It's showing record amount of coffee imports last year here in Korea. The nation's customs service and the coffee industry said Thursday that nearly 140,000 tons of coffee beans and coffee powder were imported in 2014, the highest amount since the year 2011. Convert that into money, and that adds up to some $595 million worth of coffee, up over 18% from the previous year. The jump is attributed to the lower cost of coffee beans from the U.S. after the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement in 2012. The coffee industry says Koreans' growing desire for a cup of coffee following a meal also played a vital role.
People with autism have a difficult time in society as they lack certain social and communication skills. But local researchers might have found the key to developing a new treatment for autism. Our Son Jung-in tells us more.
This child has been diagnosed with autism. His mother rattles a toy to try and engage with him, but he does not react and continues to play by himself. He seems to be in his own world with little need for social interaction. Until now, the treatment for autism was limited to physical therapy to reduce the repetitive behavior associated with the disorder. But recently, a group of local researchers identified a protein called IRSP53 that could be the main cause of the social impairment in people with disorders such as autism or schizophrenia. Here, in this experiment, one mouse approaches another mouse without hesitating. The mouse without the protein shows no interest in the other one and carries on with its own activity. The researchers found that something called an excitatory NMDA receptor is overactive in mice that don't have the protein, causing social and communication impairments. Scientists hope the discovery will lead to an effective treatment for similar disorders.
It is important for the NMDA receptor to function normally, because it is when this receptor is functioning at a level that's too low or too high that problems arise. Knowing the receptor's status could help doctors prescribe the right medication.
The results of the study were featured in the renowned scientific journal Nature Neuroscience. 손정인, Arirang News.
The Barbizon School in France is known for breaking with tradition and trying to present a more realistic view of nature.
Right, and if that name doesn't sound familiar, here's another name that's probably become household names in many places around the world, Jean-François Millet. And some of his original works have endured the test of time as textbook materials, and they're now here in Korea. Our Im Yoon-hee helps us take a sneak peek.
Life in the beautiful countryside. Women doing laundry by the stream, and men harvesting the fields. These are the landscapes of Fontainebleau, the French countryside that inspired many artists from the 19th century. Artists such as the legendary Theodore Rousseau. And of course Claude Monet. They all found inspiration from the rustic countryside. And even Vincent van Gogh found admiration for not just the lands of Fontainebleau, but also the artist who is at the center of it all, Jean-François Millet.
Millet is a French painter from Normandy who lived from 1814 to 1875. He is known for leading the Barbizon School, which was a forefront of the realism art movement at a time when artists began focusing on beautiful landscapes, peasants, and farmers instead of dramatic religious scenes and wealthy people. You could even say he's one of the fathers of the modernism art movement.
To celebrate the 200th year of Millet's birth, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston put together an extensive collection of over 60 different original works that tell the story of the Barbizon School and its contributions to the birth of modernism. Included in the exhibition are 4 of Millet's major paintings. Paintings that not only influenced many future artists, but also played a key role in ushering in different art movements, such as the Harvester's Resting painting, one of his most famous works that Millet poured his life into completing.
Millet considers this his most important painting and practiced on over 50 different drafts before making the final product. He played around with positioning of the figures and calculated everything. The subtitle says Ruth de Boaz, and it tells the story of this woman named Ruth and a man next to her named Boaz. The woman was recently widowed, but she works very hard in the fields with her mother-in-law to keep them alive. Boaz sees how hard she's working and falls in love with her, and they end up marrying. Millet retells the biblical story of redemption and hard work through a contemporary scene.
There are many places, many people, many faces that contributed to the development of art. But there are a few artists, legends in the field, who have made their mark and will forever be recognized. Artists such as Jean-François Millet. Im Yoon-hee, Arirang News.
You know, I grew up in places that are smack right in the middle of the equator, so I'm still getting adjusted to colder, drier weather, and I'm learning the hard way that winter, dry weather can cause your skin to become itchy and uncomfortable.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I'm constantly doing this, you know, under my jacket. But I think there's something more than dry weather to blame for this itch. For details, let's turn to Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle?
Good evening, guys, and today I'll be talking about cold hives, which is a skin reaction caused by a drastic drop in temperatures, cold air, and cold water. Now, a light reaction will be getting an itch with a rash when you come inside from the cold, whereas if it was chronic, it would last up to 6 weeks or even for a lifetime. Now, to prevent the hives, try and stay warm by layering up and taking warm baths and consume warm foods and beverages, of course. And green tea is a natural treatment since it contains natural antioxidants. Now, with that in mind, let's go over to our weather conditions for tomorrow. The rain we've been having is expected to last until early morning tomorrow, but temperatures will remain similar to today with the highs ranging between 2 to 8 degrees. Well, going over to our temperature readings for tomorrow, so we'll start off the Friday morning at -4 and gets up high at 2 degrees. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top higher at 6 and 8 degrees. Now moving over to other regions such as Jeju Island gets up to 6, Dokdo hits down to 4, while Gangneung dips way low at -9 degrees. Well, that's all for me at this hour. I'm Michelle Park, and have a wonderful evening.
You know, maybe I'll try taking a bath with green tea water.
That sounds very effective. I'll try that too.
Okay, that'll do it from us. Thanks for watching. I'm Lee Ji-yoon.
And this has been Daniel Che wishing you a good day or good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. Ji-yoon and I will be right back here, same time tomorrow.